Okay, so just wanted to run you guys through something for 15 minutes. Just some of you, it'll be a reminder. Some of you, it might be new. But what we just kind of went through over the last sort of 2 weeks with the American election. Um, every 4 years this happens, but there are different times of the year where it similar things will happen, not to this degree, but when we're doing any type of media buying, any type of campaign management, we have to remember that every platform is an auction. And this last 2 weeks is probably the most significant example I've seen of the entire algorithm being thrown off due to massive budgetary expense being poured into specifically Meta. And over the last 2 weeks, it will be dependent on what campaigns you're running. I know we had record Octobers for, a lot of clients, but it kind of depends on who you're marketing to, if they're in the same space. But to give an example to you guys, I looked at Results Driven, which is one of our clients that Andy manages. Their CPMs in October were $39, and their CPMs in November right now are averaging $198.99. So what do we do in those situations where we've got hyper competition in the auction? That's question number one. And question number two would be, maybe when you're not necessarily seeing huge fluctuations in CPM, but you're seeing abnormalities in conversions. So for example, maybe you come out of the gates really quick with a campaign, everything's in KPI, and then all of a sudden it just drops off. Well, what that usually is it's usually an indication of somebody competing with you in your particular niche that's pushing you out of the quality traffic. And some of this might be new to you, and some of this might be common knowledge to you. But I think it's very consistent that we'll often try to push through using different measures rather than looking at what we can put together as an SOP to ensure that we're effectively beating back our competition and getting to the highest quality traffic. So I want to show you guys an interesting example from last week. And I was just running ads for 7 Mile Media last week. And oftentimes what I will do is I will just kind of go mad scientist and play with some stuff and see what happens. And then, I'll share it with you guys. What was really interesting is that this is from the 9th to the 12th, when things were really at their peak. And I set up this campaign, and the campaign was very simple. The campaign was 4 different ads. I like to separate my ads out because I don't like to let the algorithm automatically zone in whatever its favorite is and then push out the other one. So I like to separate them out into different ad sets. But this particular campaign was optimized for schedule, and it was basically a mega audience of job titles and roles for business owners. So I just wanted to target business owners, job titles, roles, CEO, founder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is sort of our standard way that we would set something up. We'd set up the audiences, we'd optimize it for our core objective, and then, we would let it rip. And what was really interesting is that it came out at really high CPMs. And so what I did is I thought, you know what, I'm just going to play today. And I duplicated the entire campaign. The only thing I changed was cost per result. So instead of maximum volume, I changed it to cost per result, and I duplicated it to 100, which was my goal. I doubled it and duplicated it again. So now I'm optimizing for cost per result at 200. And then I went super high and duplicated again at a cost per result of 500. And then I actually thought, you know what? I'm just going to take as wide open audience as I can. Like every feature that Meta offers, I'm just going to turn it on. Audience expansion, whatever. And I put it from like 20 to 60 male, female, like as open as you could humanly possibly put it. And so what was interesting is that you can see in our standard setup that we would use, my CPM coming out of the gates was 176. And in some of these, I think they were like insane. Like on one day, they were like, one of them was 2000 at one point. I looked at it, it was nuts. But over this 3-day period, the main one that I set up that was our standard protocol was 176 on CPM. And then when I duplicated into the $100 target cost per result, it actually went down. And then as I duplicated again and again, it started to go back up, which kind of makes sense to me because you're asking for a smaller segment of the audience that is a higher quality segment of the audience. Now, the thing that was really odd is that the wide open targeting that I thought would be super, super cheap over the course of those 3 days was actually more expensive than anything else. When I first turned it on, it was okay. And it got more expensive every day that we kept it on. Now, what's also interesting is that if you look at the CTR all and the link click rate, our standard way of turning it on, we're shooting for a 3% CTR all and a 1% or higher link click through rate. It was really, really low over here. And on the first day I turned it on, it was even lower than this. This is a 3-day blended average. When I moved it into cost per result, it started to go up. This $200 one was very strange. It underperformed the whole way, but the $100 one was better than our normal setup. The $200 one underperformed. The $500 one was higher in both CTR all and link click through rate. And then oddly, above everything, the open was the highest CTR all and the highest link click through rate. And so you can see as well, like getting booked appointments, the open campaign was actually the cheapest of all of them. We didn't get anything down here in our normal setup, and we didn't get anything here. We got some in the cost per result in the manual bidding. And then in the open bidding, we actually were getting the cheapest ones. And the reason that I wanted to share the screen with you guys and show this to you is because oftentimes when we're running campaigns, we're only looking at creative and we're only looking at audiences. And when we're not hitting stuff, our first inclination is to change the creative or change the audience. But if you have something that doesn't look right the moment you launch it, and you're pretty sure that the audience and creative is bang on, but maybe it's too expensive, maybe the clicks are low, or maybe you've had something that's been working for a really long time and all of a sudden it stopped working, which is really, really frustrating when you're managing campaigns. I want you to consider not just moving off into new audiences or new creatives, but looking at the actual bidding strategies that you've got in play, because it's very possible that you're trying to come in somewhere that's hyper competitive and you're being pushed out and you're being pushed into the lower tranche of the traffic, or something that's been working for a long time, you've been pushed out of the higher tranche of the traffic. And then obviously the big one in this, that's the outlier, is just wide open. I mean, we don't do a lot of wide open targeting, but I think it's something worth incorporating into your testing to see, is the algorithm strong enough to be able to zone in on what you want at a cheaper cost per acquisition in some of your testing. So I just thought I would show you guys these numbers because this first campaign that I turned on was just so abysmal in everything across the board. And then every test that I tested after pretty much made it better, bidding from a manual standpoint and then even from an open standpoint. And so if you're kind of finding the same things happening in your campaigns right now, and you can do this in Tik, you can do this in Meta, you can do this in YouTube, it doesn't really matter. You can do it in all of them, but we have a tendency to just rely on one bidding strategy. And I just want to remind everybody that this is here. And if you're really confident that what you've got is working or should be working, there's other objectives that you can be putting into place to ensure that you're dotting all your I's and crossing all of your T's. So that's just what I wanted to cover with you today. I'm curious to know if anybody has any questions on that. And Ben, I know you're running a similar test right now. I looked at it this morning. I don't know if it's as decisive, but I'm just curious to know if anybody has questions or if Ben, you want to give any feedback on the test that you're running.
Still too early to tell. I mean, I think the highest cost cap that I put out there right away got a sale, which was cool to see. Even though the
Mhm.
CPMs and stuff were somewhat similar, it's still early. It's been, I mean, just touching 2 days um, on that. But now what I'm doing, going along your plan, is like I'm taking I'm doing a $300 cost cap that got the purchase.
Mhm.
So now I cut off our lowest performer of our cost cap test, and I'm running a $300 bid cap against the cost cap just to see.
Yep.
Um, and going from there. So it'll be interesting. It's still early, but yeah, I think really solid reminder. Because the
I,
tendency was like, oh, all new creative, all new audiences, you know.
right.
So yeah.
We got to remember it's an auction. Like, probably in a perfect world, I would never go into testing doing anything other than manual bidding because you can quickly see when you choose a bid amount that isn't competitive, you won't even really see traffic flow to it. You won't really see traffic start to flow until your bid is competitive enough. So it gives you an idea of where you should be. And on manual bidding, when you find the right vein, it'll actually stay way more consistent than maximum results because maximum results kind of leaves it to the algo to go all over the place. But the other interesting thing was obviously the wide open testing. I've never been a fan of wide open testing, but the wide open testing actually brought in the cheapest one, and it was still a high CPM. It was just a really interesting test. So, Unique, I'd love to know from your experience in YouTube, what have you found with regards to the bidding structure, and do you rely exclusively on the automatic bidding structure, or do you push into manual?
I start with a max conversion campaign
Mm-hmm.
to do the audience testing. Once I see the right KPIs, I wait till it hits 50 conversions and then I go into target CPA.
And do you find that it's much more consistent when you move to target CPA?
It just gives you more, how must I say, like safety, just in case something happened, like the campaign shut down, especially when you start spending bigger numbers. If you keep it on max conversion, it will just keep spending regardless if you're in CPA or out of CPA. So
Right.
target CPA is more like a filter where it will shut down when you go out of CPA. So it's more for those reasons. But I've had max conversion campaigns that convert really well. I mean, even
Yeah.
the testing campaigns, technically, you could just keep it in max conversion, duplicate it out, and then do target CPA because the data is already there.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make there. If you've got something that's working in max conversions or max volume or whatever the term is in whatever platform, I'm definitely not recommending that you shut it off and move to manual bidding. If anything, what I'll do is I'll duplicate it and shift it to manual bidding and then see, does it outperform the max volume? You should never shut something off that's working for sure, because you can find winners in both, and you want to leave them running if you do. But it was really interesting this last weekend where things were hyper competitive to see how poor the quality was on just standard max volume bidding, and pushing into these other elements and testing them had pretty significant differences on the quality of traffic that was coming through.
I also think like relying more on the high rows is these days very important on the custom domain tracking. More and more the privacy rules are getting more implemented. So like the base pixels are getting blocked. Um, so like having like a custom domain, whether it be through ClickMagick or through Hyros, helps with getting the right data attribution because you can definitely see that the data attribution from like a standard Google from Facebook is not accurate.
Agreed. Mike, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, man. I mean, on the Facebook tracking, I'll push back a little bit and say that you're using cost cap incorrectly. that there's the cost cap. If you go into, the information that Facebook has about cost cap versus bid cap. So
Mhm.
this is a little bit of a confusing thing with Facebook, is like if you go into the manual bidding section of the ad set and you just start dropping numbers in, it's going to default to cost cap. And with what cost cap does, at least my understanding of it, is it's trying to cap your cost per acquisition at whatever number that is.
Mhm.
So if you start to go in and be like, I want a $600 cost cap, it's gonna like just go ahead and spend whatever. Jason has a really interesting play in his playbook where you take an ad set and you do the budget at like $10,000 a day, but you drop the cost cap at whatever KPI you have. And
Mhm.
so that will actually that'll stop the spend at whatever, it'll only spend if it thinks it can get you a conversion for that number. So I haven't done that. I've only done that in Blue Moto,
Mhm.
where, I'll drop, they don't usually that they don't care how much I spend. I'll put it at 10,000 bucks a day and do the cost cap at $25. And then some days it'll spend 2 grand, some days it'll spend, eight, some days it'll spend nothing. So I'd be curious if for you to do an audit of what you were doing, and if it's working, leave it alone, but duplicate it out and try and switch it to bid cap as opposed to cost cap. I think that'll be a little more aggressive for you.
Yeah,
That's
and
usually
that
what
and
I
this was
recommend to
the
people.
and it's weird they changed their terminology in there. Now it's cost per result versus cost cap, but they still do have bid
Yeah,
cap. And
yeah,
that was one of the things that I didn't get to in this particular test, is duplicating the entire thing out to bid cap as well. That would have been a beautiful 4-point test. Cost per result, bid cap, our standard setup, and wide open. But it was definitely interesting that saying to the system, I'm willing to pay as much as this and no more than this at the higher numbers, ended up getting higher quality traffic through, which you could see from both the click-through rates and from the actual appointment gathering. And then really probably the most interesting one was the wide open test. I was shocked that it was getting such high click-throughs and the cheapest booked appointments. So a
yeah.
good reminder again that there's other bidding strategies that are out there. And if I think specifically, if you've gone out like Unique's talking about and you've done your audience testing and you've done your creative testing and like these elements work, and then all of a sudden your stuff just falls off a cliff, which has happened to all of us many, many times, don't just default to new creative, new audiences. Stop for a second and ask yourself, what would happen if I tested cost per result, or I tested bid cap, or I tested this wide open? Is it possible that I just got pushed out of the zone of traffic that I want to be in, and I'm going to bully my way back into this scenario?
I'll even say, Aaron, you can pretty reliably, depending on the industry, just do bid cap all the time. Like if
I
it's
would agree
real
with you.
estate, you might as well just like not waste your time on maximize whatever. Like I don't, Sean Moore, literally the last like 2 years he was here, I just ran bid cap. I didn't do anything else.
Very interesting.
The REI print mail guys, I tested a little bit, max, whatever the lowest cost. And then I just like, fuck it. I mean, I just did bid cap, and all of a sudden, at least my stuff's getting a fair shake. Anything that's very competitive, you might as well just go out of the gate with it, in my experience, in my opinion.
I
Especially if
appreciate
it's a call funnel.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Any other feedback or thoughts or questions today?
Has has there been a noticeable change with the election having finished?
Yes, at least from the data that I have reviewed over the last couple of days, the CPMs are coming down. I don't think they're coming down at the speed that they should be coming down. I think that is a reflection of potential corporate greed in this scenario. But for example, if I look at RD, I looked at their campaigns 3 days ago, and they were at 198 CPM. They were down to 124 yesterday. So I'm starting to see it regulate itself back down, which is a good thing. But an outlier point to this, which I think is really important for everybody to remember as well, is that same creative, those same campaigns on Meta in November, CPM 198, compared to their CPM last month of 40 something. If I look at YouTube's CPMs last month for that same account, $37. If I look at their CPMs this month, $41. So YouTube in that same hyper competitive time frame only went up 10%. Meta went up anywhere from 400 to 500%. So again, thinking about profitability and, you know, being flexible and protecting yourself certainly makes a lot of sense to be testing both, if not starting in YouTube in hyper competitive industries or hyper competitive times.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
And I
I mean,
guess we've
the
got Christmas and
badass
Black
thing about
Friday as well, or is that all done and dusted?
What's that, Aaron?
I said Black Friday, is that done and dusted? But I guess we've got the Christmas sales coming up as well.
No, that comes up at the end of the month. And fortunately, it shouldn't really impact us because we don't do a ton of e-commerce. So not really competing in the same space. There will be some overlap in competition and CPM, but not as if we were directly in the e-commerce space itself.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Just two quick things, Aaron. First, I don't know if we can get everybody access to that. How the hell is that guy? There was one talk at TNC this year. How was his name? Caleb something or other. It was like the last day, and
Okay.
he had this great talk about essentially Facebook signals to Facebook. And I've been, you know, this is in the realm of what you're talking about here, but it's just something to keep in mind. Like he has an interesting way that he views how the algorithm works, and I've tested a couple of things. So like every change that you make to an ad, right, that's a signal to Facebook, and it interprets it in certain ways, right? So when you're doing cost cap, that's a signal. When you're changing creative, that's a signal. When you're changing budget, that's a signal. So it kind of it plays a little bit into what you're talking about. So that might be a talk worth at least for the Facebook CMs to have a look through.
I'll pull it up.
I know we got the recordings. I don't know where they ended up, but
I will pull them up and find them. It's a great point.
Sweet. Yeah. Yeah, second point to the YouTube and the competitive markets. Just I will plug again. The YouTube like custom intent audiences are just like killer for that stuff. Like if you're on YouTube and you haven't dove into those, it's like I mean, you know, I know that Alric has talks a lot about that in his training, but I'm using that for using those for Rise Up right now, and I think I mentioned it to you. I'm just like, you know, I'm taking shit from competitors who dropped us, and you know, using their own URLs. So it's like I'm using my own I'm using their spend that I spent for them against them because they have brand name now. So I just, you know, so that just is
Smart.
talk about to get a competitive advantage as Facebook takes away our ability to get really granular with our targeting, because it's, yeah, you've noticed like some of these old real estate audience recommendations that we have in Basecamp, it's like most of them are gone now. You can't target people, like most of the influencers are out of there. You haven't been able to target Tony Robbins, for example, for like years, you know, so they're out. But you know, on YouTube, you can go and you can grab all the URL, you can grab Tony Robbins' name, you can grab all the URLs. Like I did this for Neuromasters because they like, you know, Tony Robbins' audience is very similar. I just grabbed like, you know, all the purchase links, you know, like the sales pages from Tony Robbins stuff, and I threw them into a custom audience. And then anybody who visits those sites, that's who YouTube like pulls them in. So just,
Brilliant.
To one up what you were saying about YouTube.
Yeah, I love it. Great idea. Anybody other have thoughts, questions, feedback today? No? Okay. Well, thanks for joining me today. I just wanted to remind everybody that there's other options out there. And if you get stuck, to just think a little bit more bid strategy than creative or audience strategy and see if it turns things around for you. And on that note, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Aaron.
Now,